What happens when the man you've been mocking turns out to be your boss? This is a question that one team discovered in the most humbling way imaginable. It was one of those unremarkable mornings that gave no hint of the tumult to come. The sun shone brightly over downtown Dallas, and the streets thrummed with activity as people hurried along their daily routines. Among the bustling crowd was a man named Elijah, a delivery driver whose years of experience had taught him much about the world. Elijah was not a man known for flamboyance or loud declarations. Instead, he carried himself with a quiet dignity that spoke volumes about his character. On this particular morning, Elijah was tasked with an important delivery, one that would set into motion a chain of events he had long anticipated. Elijah's assignment required him to make his way to one of the city's most prestigious restaurants, Bel Andreas Fine Dining. This establishment was renowned for its upscale ambience, its meticulously curated menu, and its reputation for being both a center of high culinary art and a bastion of pretentiousness. It was not the kind of venue where Elijah normally felt at home. Indeed, he was more accustomed to the streets and back alleys than to the polished interiors of exclusive dining halls. Yet, on that day, duty had called, and Elijah's truck rumbled steadily into the back alley of the restaurant. This area, reserved for deliveries, exuded an unmistakable air of exclusivity. Large silver doors, boldly marked "Staff Only," towered over the entrance, almost daring anyone who did not belong to cross the threshold. After parking his truck, Elijah stepped out with calm determination. He grabbed the invoice from the cab and with practiced ease slid his gloves on. Then he carefully began to stack the boxes containing organic produce and specialty seafood onto his dolly. Each box was handled with care as he wheeled his load toward the entrance. As he advanced, he heard faint laughter echoing from inside, a sound that caused his chest to tighten. The laughter was a blend of ridicule and superiority, a reaction that had become all too familiar to him over the years. Elijah shook his head lightly. He was no stranger to being underestimated or judged for his work, but he was not one to let such disparagement unsettle him. Steadily, he knocked twice on the imposing steel door and waited. When the door swung open, a young man dressed in a crisp white chef's jacket regarded him with an expression that suggested he was nothing more than an inconvenience. Behind this chef, two staff members emerged, one stifling a chuckle and the other rolling her eyes in clear disdain. "Deliveries are supposed to come earlier," the young man snapped, his tone dripping with annoyance. Unfazed, Elijah calmly held up the invoice and said, "I'm right on schedule, sir. Fresh seafood from Gulf Coast Imports and the organic greens you requested." The chef waved him off dismissively. "Whatever. Just bring it in and don't block the kitchen entrance," he ordered. As Elijah pushed his dolly into the restaurant, he became increasingly aware of the glances cast his way. Staff members looked at him with expressions that ranged from amused to outright condescending. Someone muttered under their breath, "Guess the company sends just anyone to places like this." It wasn't merely the words that stung, it was the tone, that mocking, dismissive tone that spoke louder than any insult. Yet Elijah pressed on. He continued unloading the boxes with deliberate precision, his hands steady even as the disparaging remarks hung in the air like a foul odor. He did not flinch. He was determined and knew deep down that something was about to change. As he maneuvered his dolly deeper into the restaurant, Elijah took a moment to absorb his surroundings. Bel Andreas Fine Dining was every bit as extravagant as the rumors suggested. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a golden glow upon marble floors polished to such a high sheen that one could see their reflection perfectly. The open kitchen sparkled with stainless steel appliances, and every corner of the establishment screamed opulence and wealth. Yet beneath the flawless exterior lay a less refined reality. Elijah observed the staff as they moved with rapid efficiency, not solely because they were skilled, but also with an unmistakable air of self-importance. It became evident to him that these people did not take pride in the quality of their work. Instead, they took pride in the hierarchy that placed them above others. At that moment, Elijah recognized that he occupied the very bottom of this hierarchy. "Make sure you're not blocking the chef's station," barked a woman in a sharply tailored black suit. She didn't even glance up from the clipboard clutched in her hand as she strode past him. "Yes, ma'am." Elijah replied in a polite yet firm tone. He had no problem following instructions, however, he could feel her scrutinizing gaze, as though she was searching for a reason to dismiss him outright. Nearby, two waiters hovered at the edge of the dining area, folding napkins and whispering among themselves. It wasn't hard to deduce that they were discussing him. Every so often they would steal furtive glances in his direction, their smirks barely hidden. "What do you think? 5 minutes before he messes something up?" one of them snickered. Elijah paid no heed to the disparaging comments and continued his work. Over the years, he had learned that investing energy in such small-minded remarks was not worth his time. Instead, he focused on unloading the boxes neatly onto the counter, beside the walk-in refrigerator. Yet, the comments persisted. "You'd think someone delivering to a place like this would at least dress better," another voice remarked. Elijah glanced down at his uniform. It was clean, pressed, and perfectly practical for someone tasked with hauling boxes all day, but to these people, it was never good enough. It did not matter, however. He was not there to impress anyone. Having finished unloading the first load, Elijah turned to head back to his truck. As he did so, he passed a group of line cooks gathered near the grill. They paused their conversation and watched him intently. One of them, a tall man whose smirk practically screamed trouble, leaned over and whispered loudly enough for Elijah to hear, "Bet he couldn't even afford to eat here, let alone step through the front door." The others laughed, and although Elijah had grown accustomed to such treatment, he felt his jaw tighten ever so slightly. He had long practiced the art of letting things slide, yet today their taunts were beginning to test his patience. Still, Elijah maintained his composure as he returned outside to retrieve the next load, but the worst was yet to come. Inside the restaurant, the mocking laughter grew even louder, and Elijah could sense that the eyes of the staff were fixed upon him as if he were a spectacle. He returned to his truck and loaded the second set of boxes onto his dolly. The morning heat was beginning to creep in, and the sweat on his brow mixed with the dust from the alleyway. As he pushed his dolly back toward the kitchen doors, the faint sound of laughter echoed again from within. They had not even attempted to lower their voices. Resolved, Elijah re-entered the kitchen. There, the head chef, a sharply featured man named Damien, stood by the counter meticulously inspecting the ingredients Elijah had delivered earlier. With a slight sneer, Damien picked up a crate of seafood. "Is this the best they could send?" he inquired in a tone that bordered on contempt. Someone nearby muttered just loud enough for Elijah to catch the comment. Elijah paused briefly, considering, "If there's an issue with the quality, I can call the supplier." But before he could continue, Damien dismissed him with a wave. No, just drop it off and leave. We've got more important things to focus on." As Elijah began unloading the second batch of boxes, he couldn't help but notice the way Damien carried himself. The chef spoke in a loud, commanding voice, directing his staff with exaggerated authority, as if he needed to remind everyone in the room who was in charge. "I swear, Daman," he said, turning to one of the servers. "The standards are dropping everywhere. Look at this guy. Do they not teach professionalism to delivery drivers anymore?" A young server, barely out of her teens and wearing a strained smile, glanced at Elijah but said nothing. Instead, she nodded at Damien and busied herself setting up the nearby dining area. Elijah continued his work, his head held high. He was determined not to let the cutting comments affect him, yet he could not ignore the growing irritation that stemmed not only from their words, but from the blatant lack of respect, the underlying assumption that he was somehow lesser simply because of his job. As he moved to stack the empty crates, one of the kitchen staff called out, "Hey, delivery guy, you missed a box." Elijah turned, confused because he was certain he had not. The staff member pointed toward a crate near the door. Working steadily, Elijah walked over and bent down to retrieve it, only to discover that the crate was empty. Another burst of laughter rippled through the kitchen. "Just messing with you, man," one of them joked, slapping his knee. "Relax a little." Elijah said nothing in response. Instead, he carefully set the empty crate back down and resumed his work, completing his tasks without further comment. Inside, Elijah's patience was slowly wearing thin, yet he reminded himself of his purpose. He had a job to do and a point to make, even if his colleagues did not yet understand it. Finally, when the delivery was complete, Elijah handed the signed invoice to Damien. The chef barely glanced at him as he swiped his signature across the paper. "You can go now." Damien said curtly, not even offering a thank you. Elijah paused for a moment, his eyes steady, and said evenly, "Have a good day," before turning and heading back to his truck. But, as Elijah reached the door, one of the waiters muttered under his breath, "Yeah, go back to wherever you came from." At that moment, Elijah stopped in his tracks. His hand rested on the door handle, and the room fell into an eerie silence. Every eye in the vicinity was on him. Slowly, he turned his gaze toward the waiter. There was no trace of anger in his expression, only a calm confidence that immediately silenced the smirks and whispers. "I came here," Elijah said steadily, "to deliver something you clearly need more of. Respect." His words echoed in the hushed room, and then he walked out. Yet the real surprise was still waiting, a revelation that would soon turn the tables completely. Elijah leaned against the side of his truck, taking a moment to catch his breath. Although the delivery was done, the heavy burden of the morning's events still lingered. He had encountered similar derision before, but something about this day felt different. Perhaps it was the way his critics were so comfortably ensconced in their assumptions, so utterly blind to the possibility that he was much more than they perceived. As he looked up, his eyes caught sight of the restaurant's grand facade. The elegant name, Bel Andreas, etched in gold letters above the entrance. It was almost surreal. Just a few weeks earlier, he had signed the final papers that made him the owner of this very establishment. A bold, transformative step in his burgeoning empire of fine dining venues. Elijah's journey to this moment had never been easy. It was not born of privilege or shortcuts, but rather the product of years of hard-won sweat, sacrifice, and an unyielding determination to prove himself. Growing up in a small town in Louisiana, where opportunities were scarce and expectations for someone like him were even scarcer, he learned early the values of hard work and integrity. His parents had toiled relentlessly, instilling in him the belief that perseverance and honesty would be his guiding lights. At the tender age of 16, Elijah began his career as a dishwasher in a modest local diner. He watched the cooks and servers with wide-eyed fascination, dreaming of one day creating something much greater, something extraordinary. Except extraordinary. Over the years, Elijah steadily climbed the ladder, transitioning from kitchen staff to manager and eventually saving enough money to open his very first restaurant. It was not ostentatious or glamorous, but it was undeniably his, and from that humble beginning his vision expanded. When the opportunity arose to purchase Bel Andreas, Elijah did not hesitate. He recognized the inherent risks, but he also saw what the restaurant could become under his leadership. Despite the establishment's long-held reputation for exclusivity, Elijah perceived a latent potential that went far beyond surface appearances. He envisioned transforming it into a place where every individual, whether a guest, staff member, or delivery driver, felt genuinely valued. However, he also understood that such a transformation would not be easy. To truly effect change, Elijah decided not to announce his new ownership immediately. Instead, he chose to observe the restaurant's culture firsthand, to watch how the staff behaved when they believed no one was watching. What he saw that morning confirmed his suspicions. The time for change was long overdue. After finishing his deliveries, Elijah climbed back into his truck and took a moment to record some notes on his tablet. He was preparing for a meeting with the restaurant staff that afternoon, a meeting he had deliberately scheduled without public announcement. He had instructed the manager to gather everyone in the dining room at 3 p.m. With that in mind, Elijah reflected on the events of the day. He recalled the dismissive attitude of Chef Damien and the condescending remarks from other staff members. He thought about how quickly they had judged him, based solely on his appearance and his role as a delivery driver. Rather than feeling angry, Elijah felt a deep sense of disappointment in how easily prejudice and disrespect could take root. By the time he drove away from the restaurant, Elijah had made a firm decision. The forthcoming meeting would not merely be an introductory session. It would be a defining moment, a chance to set the tone for what Bel Andreas would represent moving forward. For Elijah, respect, humility, and equality were not just empty buzzwords. They were the very foundations upon which he had built his life and career, and in just a few short hours, the staff would learn exactly who Elijah was and why he was there. When the clock struck 3 p.m., the restaurant staff began to gather in the main dining room of Bel Andreas Fine Dining, Their expressions ranged from curious to annoyed. Damien, ever the picture of defiance, leaned against a table with his arms crossed, his face a mixture of irritation and boredom. "What's this about?" he muttered to a nearby server. "We're slammed tonight and now we have to sit through a meeting." At that moment, the restaurant manager, a middle-aged man named Greg, stood near the entrance, looking unusually nervous. He had been instructed to assemble everyone, yet even he was unclear about the meeting's purpose. All he had been told was that the new owner would be arriving that day and that attendance was mandatory. As the staff took their seats, the doors to the dining room opened and in walked Elijah, still dressed in the uniform he had worn that morning. For a few seconds, the room was completely silent, with staff members exchanging confused glances. Damien let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered under his breath. Undeterred, Elijah walked confidently to the center of the room, his calm demeanor unshaken by the palpable tension and unspoken questions that filled the air. He allowed the silence to stretch, meeting each pair of eyes one by one. Finally, Greg cleared his throat, breaking the awkward quiet. Elijah? What are you doing here?" "This meeting is for staff only," he said hesitantly. Elijah smiled faintly and replied steadily, "I know, Greg. That's exactly why I'm here." Damien rolled his eyes. "Look, if this is about the delivery earlier, can we just move on? We have actual work to do." Turning his attention directly to Damien, Elijah fixed him with a steady gaze and said, "You're right, Chef Damien. This is about the delivery, but it's about a lot more than that." Damien raised an eyebrow, but before he could speak further, Elijah continued. "Allow me to introduce myself properly. My name is Elijah Reynolds, and as of 3 weeks ago, I am the new owner of Bel Andreas Fine Dining." At this announcement, the room fell silent once more, but now the air was thick with shock. Damien's smirk vanished, replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. The servers exchanged stunned looks and Greg's face turned pale. Finally, in a barely audible whisper, Damien managed to say, "You're the owner?" "That's right," Elijah said evenly. "Before you say anything else, I want you all to understand one thing. This isn't about me flaunting my title or putting anyone in their place. It's about respect." He paused, allowing his words to settle. "I spent the morning observing how this team operates. I saw how you treated me simply because you assumed I was just a delivery driver. I want you to think about what that says. Not about me, but about you." Damien opened his mouth as if to respond, but he quickly fell silent, and the servers lowered their eyes, fixated on their shoes as if in contemplation. Elijah's voice grew even steadier as he continued. "You judged me before you even knew who I was. You made assumptions based on my appearance, my attire, and the job I perform. And that behavior not only hurts me, it hurts this restaurant. It undermines the culture we are trying to build here." The room remained utterly silent as Elijah's words resonated. He looked around, meeting the eyes of each person present. Every individual who walks through these doors deserves respect, whether they are a guest, a member of our staff, or someone delivering the ingredients that keep this place running. That is the standard I expect from every single one of you. For the first time that day, Elijah observed something new in their expressions. A flash of shame. Although the look was brief and the discomfort palpable, it was exactly what they needed to experience. The silence in the room grew almost tangible, each staff member seemingly weighed down by the significance of Elijah's message. Even Damien, who had earlier appeared defiant, shifted uncomfortably. His arms, once folded defiantly, now hung loosely by his sides. The servers avoided making eye contact, and the smirks that had once been so common were nowhere to be seen. Stepping forward, Elijah's tone softened slightly, yet he retained all the authority of his words. "I know that change does not happen overnight," he said. "But if this restaurant is going to succeed, it must start with how we treat one another. It starts with accountability and respect for everyone." He paused once more, scanning the room to ensure that his message had been fully absorbed. "I did not begin at the top," he explained. "I have been exactly where you are, working long hours in roles that often go unnoticed. I have scrubbed floors, washed dishes, and carried boxes, just as I did this morning. And let me tell you, those roles are just as important as any chef or manager in this room. Without them, this establishment would not run. The staff remained silent, the weight of his journey and his words settling over them more powerfully than any reprimand ever could. After a few moments of reflective silence, Elijah continued, "So here is what will happen. Starting today, we are going to build a new culture here. A culture where every role is respected, where assumptions and judgments have no place. And if anyone believes they cannot be a part of that, then this is not the right team for you." His declaration was met with quiet nods and murmurs of apology from several staff members. Finally, Damien, with a hesitant tone, managed to say, I didn't mean to be disrespectful. But before he could continue, Elijah raised his hand to halt him. "Actions speak louder than words, Chef. If you are willing to do better, then prove it. Not just for me, but for every member of this team." He stepped back, his calm demeanor returning as he added, "We all have biases, we all make mistakes, but what truly matters is how we move forward. I believe that this team can be better, and I'm here to help us get there." With that, Elijah turned to leave the room, but not before offering one final, resonant statement. "Remember, respect costs nothing, but its absence can cost you everything." As Elijah walked out, the room fell into deep, thoughtful silence. The weight of his message pressed down on everyone, and for the first time in years, Bel Andreas Fine Dining began to feel as though it might finally live up to its name. This story, however, is not solely about a restaurant. It is about all of us. How often do we make assumptions about someone without truly knowing their story? How frequently do pride and prejudice cloud our judgment? Let us do better. In our workplaces, our communities, and in every single interaction we have, respect and kindness have the power to change lives. They have the power to build bridges that unite us. In the days and weeks that followed, the story of that morning spread far beyond the walls of Bel Andreas. Staff members discussed it in hushed tones during breaks, and many admitted that Elijah's words had forced them to confront their own prejudices and assumptions. Some of those who had once been dismissive began to show signs of genuine reflection. One of the young waiters, whose earlier smirk had been so brazen, was later overheard expressing regret for his thoughtless comment. Even the woman in the sharp black suit, who had been so quick to dismiss Elijah, appeared more subdued in the days after, as if she were reconsidering her own judgments. Word of the incident traveled quickly throughout the neighborhood. Shoppers in nearby stores began to talk about the delivery driver who had stood up for respect and dignity. Social media buzzed with accounts of Elijah's calm yet powerful response, and soon his story was being shared by community leaders and activists alike as a reminder of the importance of treating everyone with dignity. Elijah's quiet resolve in the face of prejudice became a symbol of hope, a call to action for all who had ever been marginalized or underestimated. 1 week after that fateful morning, Elijah was invited to speak at a community event focused on diversity and inclusion. There, in front of a diverse audience of local residents, business owners, and community leaders, he recounted his experience at Bel Andreas. "I'm not saying I set out to change hearts and minds," he told the crowd, his voice calm and measured. "But if my words can inspire even one person to question their assumptions and treat others with more respect, then I consider my work done." His speech resonated deeply with those in attendance, many of whom later described feeling empowered to stand up against discrimination in their own lives. In the weeks that followed, Bel Andreas underwent a subtle transformation. The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted as new policies were implemented to ensure that every employee, regardless of their position, was treated with respect and fairness. The management began to hold regular meetings to discuss workplace culture and the importance of inclusivity. Staff training sessions were introduced, focusing on overcoming unconscious bias and fostering an environment where every team member felt valued. Although change did not occur overnight, the seeds planted by Elijah's words gradually began to sprout. The very energy in the restaurant shifted, from one of condescension and hierarchy to one of collaboration and mutual respect. Elijah's experience at Bel Andreas eventually became a case study in the power of quiet resilience and the transformative impact of treating others with respect. Local media outlets picked up the story, and soon interviews with Elijah and some of the restaurant staff were featured in regional news segments. The story was celebrated not as one of confrontation or anger, but as a testament to the strength of calm determination in the face of bigotry. It's about having the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's easier to just walk away. One interviewee remarked, "Over time, the narrative surrounding that morning began to shift. What had once been a story about a delivery driver facing ridicule became a broader conversation about respect, dignity, and the need for systemic change." The staff at Bel Andreas gradually began to internalize the lessons of that day. Some started to initiate conversations about how they could contribute to a more respectful work environment. Others found themselves challenging their own assumptions about their colleagues and even about themselves. For many, it was a moment of personal reckoning, a chance to re-examine the way they treated others and the legacy they wished to leave behind. Elijah, for his part, continued to work with quiet determination. Although he had moved on to new projects within his growing empire of fine dining establishments, he never forgot the lesson he had imparted that day. In every new restaurant he acquired, he made it a point to observe the culture first before announcing any changes. He believed that true leadership began with listening, observing, and understanding the people you were meant to serve, not simply imposing new rules from above. His own journey, from a humble dishwasher in a small Louisiana diner to the owner of prestigious restaurants, remained a source of inspiration for many who faced similar obstacles. As months turned into years, the legacy of that morning at Bel Andreas continued to influence not only the restaurant's culture, but also the broader community. Former employees of the restaurant went on to hold leadership positions in other local businesses, often citing the transformation they experienced as a turning point in their professional lives. Community leaders used Elijah's story as a rallying cry for initiatives designed to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. And across the city, organizations began to incorporate training on unconscious bias and respect into their employee development programs. In one particularly moving instance, a local school invited Elijah to speak to its students about perseverance, respect, and the importance of challenging stereotypes. In front of a hall filled with young faces, he recounted his experiences with humility and grace. "Your worth is not determined by your job title or the color of your skin," he told them, "but by the content of your character and the respect you show to others. Never let anyone make you feel less than you are." The students listened intently, many inspired by his journey and the strength of his conviction. The ripple effects of that one encounter in a grocery store and later in a fancy restaurant reached far and wide. Social media campaigns, community workshops, and local business roundtables began to echo the same message, that every person deserves respect, regardless of their background or occupation. Elijah's story became a symbol of how one act of dignity can inspire change and challenge deeply ingrained prejudices. Even the elderly woman, whose initial harsh words had sparked the confrontation, was eventually moved by the unfolding events. Though she never publicly apologized, those who had known her noticed a subtle shift in her demeanor over time. In quiet moments, when she sat by herself in her modest home, she would sometimes reflect on that day, the day when she had spoken without knowing, and the day when a young man's measured response had begun to transform hearts. It was said that on occasion she even looked out her window toward the bustling streets of her neighborhood, as if contemplating a change in her own perspective. The narrative of that day, the story of a delivery driver who rose above ridicule and injustice, became part of local folklore. It was shared at community gatherings, in workplace meetings, and even on television talk shows. People spoke of Elijah not only as a symbol of resilience, but also as a reminder that respect is a fundamental right, one that must be extended to every person, no matter how small their role may seem. In the end, what began as an ordinary day turned into an extraordinary lesson in humility, dignity, and the transformative power of respect. Elijah's quiet strength had not only silenced a room full of skeptics, but had also sown the seeds of change in a community that had long been divided by prejudice. His story reminds us that true leadership is not about wielding authority or demanding obedience. It is about showing respect, embracing humility, and inspiring others to do the same. As we reflect on Elijah's journey, we are reminded of the importance of challenging our own assumptions and treating every individual with the dignity they deserve. In our daily lives, whether in our workplaces, our communities, or even in the simplest interactions, a small act of respect can create ripples that extend far beyond the moment. It can open doors, mend hearts, and build bridges where none existed before. So, let this story be a call to action for all of us. Let it remind us that our words and actions hold immense power. They can hurt or they can heal. They can divide or they can unite. It is up to each one of us to choose kindness and understanding over prejudice and disdain. And if one man's quiet defiance can transform a culture built on hierarchy and disrespect, imagine what we can achieve if we all commit to living by the principles of respect, humility, and equality. In the face of ignorance, let us be the voices of reason and compassion. Let us remember that every person has a story, and every story deserves to be heard. For in our diversity lies our strength, and in our unity lies the promise of a better tomorrow. As we move forward, let us strive to build a world where every encounter is marked by kindness, where every interaction is an opportunity to affirm the dignity of another human being. May Elijah's story inspire us all to challenge our own biases and to treat each other with the respect we all deserve. Together, we can transform not only our workplaces and communities, but the very fabric of our society. One act of kindness, one moment of understanding at a time. Let us remember, respect costs nothing, but its absence can cost us everything. May we all choose to build bridges of understanding and compassion, and may the legacy of Elijah's quiet strength guide us on the path to a more just and inclusive world.